As I mentioned in a previous podcast, no dummy, AI is not coming for your job. And in fact, we can dive into the details and quickly develop a flow chart about where this is coming from. One of the ways that we can start with this is to first define what AI is. We have narrow AI, and narrow AI is a form of intelligence that's really not intelligent. It's a way of doing pattern matching or doing things like full text search. Examples of this could be like a voice assistant. They're pretty buggy, or we have something that can give you directions, or it could be a coding assistant that auto completes a function. It looks like it has some form of intelligence, and it is actually very useful to use these kinds of tools. Like, for example, I think Claude Code could be very useful for, let's say, spitting out a README file. But what we see with these combined narrow AI solutions is that by default, they have lots of bugs with the solution. For example, if you ask a narrow AI solution to do something, it's going to contain some bugs. And then when you cobble them all together and you have, let's say, a multimodal type solution, each one of those is a narrow AI, and then the bugs compound. And so in many ways, you want to get out as quickly as possible. It doesn't mean they're not useful, but you want to get in, ask for some kind of solution, and then get out because the bugs will compound. And let's now move to the next kind of AI, which is AGI. There's no evidence at all that we're even close to AGI or that it's even possible. And part of this is that if you think about what AGI is, it's human level intelligence. In order to have human level intelligence or even animal level intelligence, we have to have consciousness. Fortunately, in my career, in my early 20s, I was at Caltech and I met an expert on the field of consciousness who is a former brain surgeon, who is a professor in the computational neuroscience lab. And he explained really simply to me what consciousness is. Consciousness is the ability to recognize what's happening. So, for example, if you're sitting in a chair and someone says, "Are you aware that there's pressure on your butt?" Well, now you're aware because someone told you and your consciousness was made aware of that fact. Consciousness is the ability to recognize what's happening in your environment, be able to switch context. There is no concept of that with narrow AI, and there's no concept of that even in the future with the approaches that we're using for narrow AI. So the idea that general AI is even close or it's even possible is complete fantasy, magical thinking. You might as well think that a great flood was responsible for changes in the earth, right? This is a magical thinking methodology. And then we have super AI or ASI, where you have something that could exceed all human intelligence. And then that's, who knows, maybe like a doomsday scenario, or the scene from, the Foundation series from Isaac Asimov. That's even more of a fantasy. So we have no evidence at all that AGI is even possible. It's even close to happening. There's evidence that is against it. So now that's the background about automating developer jobs. Now let's go into a flow chart here and talk about this concept of AI is automating coding jobs. I think the easiest way to find out whether someone is lying or a magical thinker or incompetent is to ask the person who's saying that, can you explain what DevOps is? Now, the reason why I explain this is that DevOps is in fact a proven methodology that is similar to the Toyota way. Toyota has some of the best methodologies for building cars that have low defects because they do things like look and see or continuous improvement. They have this methodology of always fixing things continuously, or Kaizen. And that has translated itself into the software industry. And really what DevOps is a way of continuously improving. So you look at the build system and you look at the testing and the linting and the formatting. You look at that every time you make a change, you're constantly improving your system. And that has no AI component with it at all, other than maybe some statistical analysis with linting tools and code complexity tools. But basically you're pushing these changes into production, measuring the result, and that feedback loop is effectively making your system better. So if someone cannot explain to you what DevOps is, how could they possibly understand, because they don't understand what continuous improvement is, how could they understand the effect that narrow AI will have on software development. So in a flowchart perspective, I would say if you cannot explain DevOps, you're incompetent, right? So we just start there. Now, let's say someone can explain DevOps and they understand why it's such a good methodology for improving software engineering. The next question to ask would be, oh, well, you can explain DevOps. So does your company actually use DevOps? If they say that their company doesn't use DevOps, but all jobs are going to be automated with narrow AI, they're unfortunately inexperienced and they're a magical thinker. So in that scenario, how could you possibly say your company doesn't use DevOps, because that is the methodology that has been proven to be effective, and that you think AI will, or narrow AI will automate jobs? You don't know what you're talking about, and you're a magical thinker. Now, if you can say you know what DevOps is and your company also uses DevOps, now things get a little bit more interesting now, because you do actually know what you're talking about. So then the question is, why would you think that narrow AI has any form of intelligence? If you understand how DevOps works, you would be pretty scared about introducing something that's very buggy into really the methodology of DevOps. So likely, I think this is going to be very rare to find someone who thinks this. They're a magical thinker, and there are people that are magical thinkers. They think that there's mystical things that happen in the world. They may be unaware of the scientific process. We don't know. That maybe they really believe these magical things. So I think this is an important way to really dive into someone who says, oh, AI is automating coding jobs, is walk me through it. Walk me through what DevOps is. If they can't even explain what DevOps is, they're not a trusted source. Now, if they can explain it, but their company doesn't use DevOps, you also have to go, how could you possibly tell me that you're not using the industry standard for software engineering, but some new thing is going to be better than the thing that has already been proven to be effective, right? And then likewise, the more rare scenario is someone says that they do understand DevOps and they do use DevOps, but they think all jobs will be automated. So I think this is one of the more interesting ways to get right at the heart very quickly with this false narrative that AI is automating coding jobs. Now, I will say that there's a little bit of other details in here that I mentioned in a previous podcast. For example, there are people that don't do any work in organizations. I don't think it's as common as people think, but if you have someone that's been eliminated from a role because they did literally nothing, maybe they're on the phone or on Facebook all day, well, is that AI automating a job? Of course it's not. Someone didn't do anything, and now they were eliminated and nothing happened. And likewise, there are situations where people are in roles at organizations where they do negative value. Maybe they create code at 2 a.m. in the morning, they're drinking or something, and they create bugs in your system. Those bugs take years to get squashed. That is also pretty rare, but it does happen. I've seen it happen. People, every time they make changes to your software, they actually make the system worse. Now, this one is a very interesting one that I'll just talk about for a second, which is that how would you know someone is making your software system worse? One of the ways that you could actually develop a methodology for this is to look at the churn. There is some research that high churn files are actually correlated with defects. So in the case of the bad software engineer that's constantly making changes to the same file over and over again, the reason they're making changes to the same file over and over again is that they don't know what they're doing, right? If you're writing an algorithm and the algorithm maybe you should be fixed within a few different changes, but you keep changing it, it's because the code itself contains bugs. That's the intuition behind it. So that's another kind of an interesting component here, is that you could look at, for example, are there files that constantly keep getting changed, especially if you have good DevOps patterns and testing and linting, and also is there complexity? So I think we're at very, very, very early stages of using narrow AI combined with DevOps. And I am very excited to actually share some of the research that I'm working on that explains this. But I think we can look at these narrow AI solutions as definitely there are useful tools. I do use them, but I think it's going to be very interesting to get into the weeds here and look at some of the things that we've already learned from DevOps. For example, is there high churn? Is there high complexity? What's the code coverage? How many times per day do you deploy your software? Once we get into some of those like details and we start pulling back the strings, then I think we can really be more accurate about how big of an improvement are these coding tools. But if you just are a magical thinker, you don't even know what DevOps is. Well, I'm sorry, but your opinion doesn't matter. If you do know what DevOps is, but you don't use it, I would also say your opinion doesn't matter because you have failed to do just basic software engineering best practices. And then finally, does your company use DevOps? And if it does, and you understand DevOps, I'm curious. I'm really actually curious about why someone would think, if they truly understand DevOps, why narrow AI is going to automate developer jobs. I would suspect the person is a magical thinker or they're a grifter, but maybe they have some reason that they believe this. I'm skeptical though. So in a nutshell, those are some of my raw thoughts around how to debug and to debunk AI's automating coding jobs by using this flowchart type analysis.